Hi, I'm Stu Kagan, and welcome to Born Scrappy, the podcast for scrap metal exporters and traders. Join me in conversation with some of the most experienced traders and operators that have helped shape this incredible industry. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Becky Proler. Becky Proler is the president of Southern Core Recycling and a powerhouse in the metal recycling world. Becky's family invented the Prolerizer, the first automobile shredder, maybe the most revolutionary innovation in metal recycling, and she's still innovating today. We discuss her journey from hand sorting metal as a kid to building a thriving shredding and processing operation in Houston, to pushing the boundaries of what AI can do for metal separation. In this episode, we talk about building a business that values loyalty and grit, why technology alone won't save this industry, why never stop buying is the number one rule in scrap, adding value in a world of shifting alloys, and so much more. So let's jump into it with Becky. But first, intro. Hi, Becky. How are you?
I'm good, Stuart. Thank you for inviting me on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I must say, I remember when I first moved to the US and started doing business here, everybody always spoke about having you on the podcast and making sure that I met you. Your family has an unbelievable reputation in this industry, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's run back, a few years. I'm guessing growing up, you were always sort of in and around the industry. Can you talk us through kind of what it was like and how you landed firmly in the industry like you are now?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I went to work with my father at a very young age, not legal to work, but he put me outside, and I liked working outside. I always had like working with my hands and stuff like that. So I immediately took to the outside of the yard, and I liked the metals part. I liked the separation, and at the time the shredder was running, the Prolerizer was running, and we did a lot of hand sorting on the non-ferrous. So he would kind of put me out with a bunch of the other hand sorters, and they would watch over me for 4 or 5 hours, and it was great. Um, and then as I got older and was more interested in what was going on, spent some time with my uncles and things like that. You got to remember, I grew up in the 80s, and women were still not considered, especially in the South. That was not something that women went into, that kind of industry. And I was, for the most part, dissuaded by my family because of being a female, that really wasn't the type of industry I would want to, get involved in. And so I went completely the opposite direction. I have a master's in counseling psychology. And back then, women were still going to college to get their MRS, which I don't even know if women going to college now know what that means, much less, the whole idea of an MRS. So that didn't work for me either. And eventually, I got back into the business through a pick apart yard that my father had. And that really did get started on the West Coast with Proler and a joint venture that they had with these pick apart yards. And I was fascinated about, how they worked and also about the parts that came off of them. So my father closed the pick apart yard down. We started what was called Southern Core with a customer who was supplying us with cores. And just real briefly, cores are the part that gets remanufactured. And for some reason, I was able to learn those parts like you learn a language. I don't know how many languages you speak, Stuart, but I could look at a motor and tell you if it was a 302, a 350, if it was a 318 Chrysler. I could just look at it
Wow.
and tell you what it was. So it came very easy to me. And then when we closed the pick apart yard down, I started Southern Core with my partners, the Walkers. And then started gravitating to scrap, because part of the core business is only taking the parts that can be remanufactured. And what do you do with the parts that you can't? Well, that's, ferrous and non-ferrous scrap metal.
Absolutely. And then, so then Southern Core obviously has grown into a large operation now. I've been to visit your site down in Houston. I can't imagine, just to touch on one thing that you mentioned, I can't imagine a better way to learn the grading of metal than sorting the shredded non-ferrous at a young age. Like now everybody's got equipment for that. But if you're sitting there and taking every single piece and having to sort it, I mean, what was that like? I mean, that must have been incredible. I know you learned the cores and the motors, but that must have been just incredible.
Yeah, I still have pickers on my shredding line, because I really still realize and appreciate the importance of that. Later, we're now working on some AI technology that we have installed, but I still work on the picking line off and on, just so that I can understand how the flow is going, how our eddy currents are pushing material through, what they're rejecting, how to make those adjustments. It's not as easy to describe. So, sometimes you just have to do it. And in this business, especially, you have to get your hands dirty to really understand not only what you have, but what you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's well said. I mean, I don't believe there's any other way to learn. Yeah, you can join other areas because we want to get college students to come in and not just see it as it's a really hard place to stop. There are other areas. There's trading, there's logistics, there's other places you can go. But if you want to be well-rounded, and I guess even on the trading side, you probably do need to understand your metal really well. That time in the yard and hand sorting is absolutely vital for anybody who's trying to make it further in this industry.
Yeah, there's just no substitute. I learned. I keep learning. Because the streams are changing, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
we started out crushing cast iron motors. We were the largest supplier of cast iron in the South, because the motors coming out of cars were all made of cast iron. Well, that started transitioning and changing to aluminum head motors, and then you had aluminum block motors, and now you've got aluminum mixed with all types of fiber and plastic and things like that. So the stream keeps changing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, without really knowing and feeling and touching it, you really don't have a good grasp of it. And you have to stay on it, because let's face it, these engineers in the 60s and 70s, they could put a 350 Chevy in a 350 Olds and it would fit. Now, GM, there is only one thing that GM makes that can fit into all their other cars, and it's a liquid.
Right. Wow.
So it's not even, the parts are not interchangeable anymore.
Yeah.
So things
Yeah,
are going
that's
to
incredible.
change on the downstream of that.
Yeah, so you have to be awake to all of that. You actually have to see it when it comes in. Having had the time with your hands teaches you and it gives you the ability to do that. So you went into cores, you then started shredding, you built the metal recycling side of the business as well. That you hadn't been on the, I guess, on the commercial side by the sound of it much, or were you spending time commercially buying and selling as well up until then?
Yeah. No, I was doing all the commercial end of it too.
Okay.
We had, plant managers and ops people. But yes, I was in charge of the buying for the core yard. And then when we transitioned more into scrap, yeah, I did the majority of the buying. My partner, Carrie Coffey, did and still does a lot of the non-ferrous sales.
Mm.
So yeah, and as the commodity transitioned, right, we went from cast iron to aluminum, then I became more interested and more involved on the aluminum side.
Right.
So the things I did 20 years ago or 25 years ago are not the same things. The commodities aren't the same, simply because the engineering changed.
Yeah. And they'll carry on doing that. I mean, they're going to keep
Oh
changing.
yeah, and it'll
You have to stay
continue
ahead of it
changing.
all the time. Yeah, absolutely. Can you think of on the commercial side, whether you were buying or selling in a trade that kind of taught you something for life, right? Something that we've got the next generation that listen to the podcast, I always try and get stories from people of like something that they learned a lesson from, and they try and teach everybody else that joins the company as well.
I think, Stuart, there's several of them because I've been around for so long, but probably the first one that sticks out the most is I was having to buy a bunch of 350 Chevy motors. And some of them got shipped to Australia, believe it or not. And so you would go to salvage yards. And there was this one particular salvage yard owner who was located in Plainview, Texas. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Plainview, Texas, but it's very small. And he had the majority of the 350 Chevys in the South. You got to remember that trucks are like the number one driven vehicle down here.
Yeah, of course.
So I had called on him and asked him if there was any way I could come down and look at these motors. I wanted to buy them, and he agreed, on a price and all that. I get there, and he's got, you can put about 100 to 125 in a trailer. So he had 3 trailers worth of motors there, ready for me to buy. He's like, write the check, whatever. And the difference is I was buying 2-bolt main and 4-bolt main. So a 4-bolt main is in a heavy duty truck, and they can be made into hot rods, which apparently in Australia there was a lot of market for.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the 2-bolt mains are mainly in large cars. So he wanted me to pay him based on the number of 4-bolt mains I had, but the oil pans were still on them. And I said, I can't pay you for 4-bolt mains if I can't see if they're 4-bolt mains or not. And he said, well, then you have to take the oil pans off. And I said, well, I didn't come prepared to do that. He said, I'm not going to sell them to you unless you pay me for what I have. So either pay me for all 4-bolt mains or pull the valve covers off. So the next 3 days, I literally stood there with a 55-gallon drum. He took a forklift, and he'd had his guys put the 350 Chevy on top of the 55-gallon drum, and he did give me an air wrench, so that I could do it faster than by hand, or I'd still be there. And 7/16 and a 3/8 socket, and I took every one of those darn things off and paid him for a 4-bolt main versus a 2-bolt main. But that particular man became my mentor. He became one of my closest friends, and never, ever had to pull an oil pan again. He brought people over to see this little girl sitting there sopping in oil and grease and pulling oil pans off to see if they were he brought people over to look at me. And we did it in a barn that I remember it was raining part of the time, and the barn had a big hole in the roof. So, it didn't matter. It couldn't get any worse, right?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
At the end of the day, he respected me, and I had another word besides respect for him, but we grew into this great friendship, and he was an incredible man, always has been, and always will be.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's interesting because often going through something like that can build a relationship, right? Where somebody puts you to the test and they gain respect. And I think a lot of the time the older generation are testing the younger generation. If they come there to buy something, yeah, absolutely. If you want to buy it, but you're going to have to do the following things if you have those rules around how you're paying. And when you do it and you're willing to actually get your hands dirty, you immediately gain respect. I think you as a young girl, I think absolutely, and back then as well, just would have been an incredible sight to see for all of them running around there, no doubt.
Yeah, and at the time, my father was still alive, and they didn't have smartphones back then. They had those big bricks that were phone. So it's not like you could get the picture or see it. Nobody FaceTimed us back then.
I was thinking the same thing. No one was putting it on social media. Otherwise, it would have been all over.
Yeah.
I once was called out to buy some metal. It was an old aeroplane, and I was called out to buy this aeroplane from a
You could call him a hoarder. He had a farm, and on it he had every vehicle possible. He would go to auctions and he bought just absolutely everything. Um, I wonder still today if he's sitting on everything. But he wanted to get rid of this aeroplane because it was taking up too much space for the value that it had. And I was young. I must have been 21, 22, and really eager to start buying some material. And I went out to the site and I gave him a price. It was Duralium. I gave him a price for it. And what I didn't do was I didn't take into consideration that all the pop rivets were steel. So the entire plane had steel putting together every single sheet of Duralium. My boss at the time, after I made the purchase, said to me, "Did you take into consideration if there was any steel?" I said, "Yeah, I checked it with a magnet and I went through certain areas." He's like, "Did you check the rivets?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Okay, well, get a cutting torch and go there and literally burn out every single rivet." I think I was there for like 4 days. Just every single one I had to melt off, take it apart, put the sheets together, and send it into the yard. He was like, "We're not doing it in our yard. You made this mistake. You can do it on their site and then bring it in." I just remember that. It was hot. I was 22, just felt like an absolute idiot. They gave me a magnet to test, and for whatever reason, I didn't even see it. But they teach you a lot, those
My
lessons.
right. My uncle used to call that the high tide test. Sammy Proler went to work for my grandfather at, I think, like 12 or 13. My grandfather pulled him out of middle school because he told the principal of the school that the family needed to eat, not learn. So Sammy was the oldest. And he told this story on his second bar mitzvah when he turned 83. He called it the high
Awesome.
tide test. He went and found some steel in Galveston, which was about 50 miles away, and he bought it from a guy. He went and looked at it, paid the guy before he bought it. The next day he comes back to load it in, whatever kind of makeshift uh, truck that they had, and it was gone. Couldn't find it. And the guy that he bought it from was there, with his money and all that. And he said, "I can't go home. I can't tell my father that I lost all this money. I was trying to buy all this steel from you." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "It's high tide right now. When it goes to low tide, the steel will be there." Turns out that's exactly what happened. He had to wait
No.
all day long until we got low tide. And then he and his guys loaded it all up and brought it back to Houston. So
That's
he called it the high
incredible.
tide test.
That is awesome. I think the feeling of arriving there and nothing's there must be something he would never forget.
Well, I think we all do that. I mean, that's
Yeah.
all of our high tide. It's a high tide moment, right?
Yeah.
And I think we all have them. If you stay long enough in this industry, you're going to have one.
Yeah, that's for sure. They normally come early, and if they don't come early, I'm sorry, but they're going to come eventually.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me now, Becky, on the pricing side of things, let me rephrase that, on the buying side of things, you guys are constantly, as any metal recycler, you guys have got a shredder. It's hungry. You constantly want to be feeding it material. What's the strategy you've used over the years to make sure that you're constantly buying enough material? It's coming in the doors. Customers keep coming back. Some people are using marketing, location, pricing. What do you guys stick to?
Well, I think the fact that we've been in business for over 35 years, that in it of itself is a brand. People know you. You have name recognition. We don't stop buying. Doesn't matter how low the price goes. It doesn't matter if the mills close down like they did in '08. My family and Carrie and Sherry's family, that's your first rule. You never stop buying. You can lower your price, but you never stop buying. And even back in the Proler days, you don't sell unless you can make a profit. And during '08, we used to talk about the fact that you can't lose money if you don't sell. When you had those huge drops of 200, 300, $400 a ton. So yeah, it's a commodity and you sell it when you can make a profit or at least cover your cost. I have a very different philosophy about this because our company isn't run by lawyers and accountants. I know some of the bigger companies that are, they feel differently because inventory is always a tough thing for accountants to understand. my father used to explain LIFO and FIFO to me, and I'm like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. So we take a very basic approach to buying, which is, if we can make money on it and we can add value to it, because I very much am into adding value, then we're going to buy it. And sometimes we'll hold if we don't like the markets, or sometimes we'll sell, but we're not going to be forced to sell. So to be put into an inventory situation where you have to account for it. That's something that we try to really understand our customers, both on the buy side and the sell side.
Yeah, I think I'm very interested to know if you've ever run out of space.
No, I mean, it's not something that we've had to deal with. I mean, I think in '08 we came close in some commodities to running out of space, and during COVID, everybody stopped letting us ship. I mean, literally for months. Toyota was the only company that did not cancel shipments. And to this day, the loyalty that I have for them is amazing, because everybody else was saying, you can't ship, it's COVID. We don't have employees. Mexico was closed, which is our closest shipper. Of course, Asia was closed because they closed first.
Yeah.
And Toyota here in the US did not shut us down. They let us keep shipping.
But you were still able to buy, right? During that period, there were still people delivering material, which is interesting. So we were in New Zealand, we was completely shut down.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting that it went state by state. And so REMA, which was ISRI at the time, had people that helped us keep the state open, because Texas didn't recognize that the recycling business was a part of the critical supply chain. They recognized that the steel business was, but they didn't put two and two together, which is you have to have a supply in order to make the steel. So we lobbied as hard as we could to keep open. Our employees couldn't work virtually. You can't buy virtually. So, I mean, yes, during that time, we kept the peddlers coming in. In fact, our peddler count, I think, increased because a lot of people who, as you know, were laid off or, couldn't work, they started gathering up scrap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody found that peddler scrap went up. Larger industry account volumes slowed down. But in New Zealand, we were shut down completely. You weren't allowed out your house. So, like you say, you couldn't do it. We couldn't process our stock virtually. We couldn't pack containers virtually. Everybody just sat at home, and you carried on paying your team, obviously, because that was the right thing to do. And we paid our team, and we paid our rent, and we paid everything, and we waited to go back into the yard. Crazy thing with New Zealand was one case of COVID, and they shut the whole country down. It was a very hard time to be a metal recycler. We weren't either allowed to operate as a metal recycler. We weren't either seen as essential. What our company did was waste companies, so waste services were. So we quickly opened up a waste company, and we put our trucks on the road to start servicing waste. And then we just collected our accounts as scrap metal at the same time as collecting all their waste. It was the only way to operate in the country.
No, I mean, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for the lobbyists at REMA and everybody helping us, stay open. And it was also so much better on our employees because they had to have a place to go. Their kids were at home, their spouses were at home, and they needed to leave. They needed to have some normalcy in their lives. So it was an incredible moment for all of us.
Yeah, no doubt. Becky, you talk about starting really young and being involved in the industry for so long. How have you seen technology change, and how are you making decisions better? What sort of data do you use now which you weren't able to use previously?
Well, the data, I think, is the same. It really hasn't changed for me. That the technology would be, this whole AI thing that's starting up, and the importance of that technology in regards to alloys. I want to say about 15 or 20 years ago, the mining business A bunch of the steel mills got involved in buying X-ray technology to look for low copper steel. And that worked for a little bit, but it wasn't perfect. Now the technology is looking at various alloys, especially in aluminums. And so shredders are great. They clean up everything. They clean the ferrous and the non-ferrous. They size things. But now you have all this different alloy going into the material that you're processing. And now I think the challenge is how to identify those alloys and, and add value that way.
And are you already implementing stuff like that, or are you busy rolling that out? Or?
Yeah, I think people have to be patient because this technology is very new and it's not been tested in the field long enough. And I mean, for instance, the AI technology that we're using now, I've been working on this for 10 years, for over a decade, really, to try to segregate out these various alloys and do it in a way that you could take it out of the lab and scale it. And that's the big challenge. Yes, you can identify a different alloy with these fist-sized pieces coming out of the shredder, but can you do, 300 tons an hour? Right now, the capability is still very low. And the other thing that I would add is that it's important that we develop this technology so that the industry, the recycling industry, can grow and start to adapt. But it's also equally important that the mills, the aluminum mills, the primaries, understand where we're at with this technology and try to meet us halfway. We can upgrade the material to a certain extent. They have to be willing to take that upgraded material to that extent and develop it. They can come up with ways to melt that material. It may not be perfect, but it is definitely cleaner. And then you could skip the secondaries, which is what I think the primaries are trying to do for a number of reasons. They have multiple reasons for that. But, we all have to be willing to grow in this system, but that includes the actual end user.
I haven't seen a huge amount of growth by the end user. I haven't seen, it seems to be more they expect us to make all the change. Our industry has to spend all the money and come up with all the ways to make it cleaner to be able to allow them to buy directly from us. I don't see that necessarily changing, but I do see a lot of the people in our industry starting to work on these sort of projects to make sure that they're ahead of the game. Because those that get it right first are going to benefit the most. So are you actually working on the project or are you using the product? Which one is
it? Well, we collaborated with a company called Bender out of Austria. And I gave them specific goals that I wanted them to set. And we collaborated on the throughput, the types of material, the types of separations, and there's nothing proprietary about it. I mean, I want everybody to win in this. This isn't a selfish thing because the more that we can put this product out there, I think it will change the primaries and address some of their concerns. And also, we have more power to say, look, this is where we can take this. You've got to give us an upgraded price. And you have to be willing to then take what we're going to sell you and push it forward. So I found that collaboration with the actual manufacturer of the equipment works really well. Yes, I'm the alpha. I'm the one that is starting it. And this is not my first rodeo when it comes to being the first that they've wanted to try equipment on. I don't mind that part. And so far, it's been a really great relationship.
Awesome. And have you started reaching those sort of volume levels yet? Because you were saying that's obviously the hard part is scaling.
Yeah, I think what happens with new technology, especially with AI technology, is it doesn't go like this. What I see is it goes like this. You have good days and you have bad days.
Yeah, of course.
And you introduce all these complex sorts to it, and it has to figure it out. And then the way that it works to separate from the other alloys is so you have a mechanical separation based on a technology brain. And so the two of those have to interface and talk. And as long as those things, even with eddy currents, you have to make adjustments. So as long as those two things are going on, you're going to have good days, bad days, good days, bad days. I haven't seen anything take off like this. But I'm so excited for our industry and for the people that are working in it, like Ben Pope and what he's doing, and what Hydro is doing with some other recycling companies. I think that's exciting, and I think that is the direction that this particular commodity is headed to.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the joint venture with Padnos, maybe. It's very exciting what they're working on. Absolutely. I agree completely. Let's talk about people for a second, because you touched on your team having a place to work. How do you see, how do you see culture? What is your idea behind keeping your team always motivated, wanting to come back? And if anybody does leave, how do you make sure you have depth in all the roles?
Yeah, well, I think that the main thing is we cross-train. You don't just have somebody that runs an excavator. They run an excavator and a wheel loader and a magnet. And you don't just have one shredder pilot. You have 2 or 3 shredder pilots. You have to cross-train. And we're very lucky. We have employees that have been with us for over 20 years. And it's like we've both grown up together. It was funny because when we first started, I was younger than most of the employees. Now, after 36 years, I'm older than most of the employees. I've not only caught up to them, I'm ahead of them now. And so it is pretty interesting. I've raised a couple of generations of families, and I'm very proud of that.
How do you, what do you instill in the team? How do you make sure that Southern Core is a place people want to come back to all the time?
I think that people find value in work, especially if they know that they are the reason why that value's been added. They like that satisfaction. And so I make sure that they know that where the material goes, that we supply the big 3 automakers. They like knowing those things. They like knowing that this material goes to all the way to Korea and things like that. They appreciate the hard work that both myself and my partners show, and literally being involved in things hand in hand with them, whether it's me being on the picking line or Carrie getting involved in, quality control and safety. They understand that especially after COVID, that we're just a big family. And I think that's really brought it home for most of our employees.
Yeah, I second that notion of when you're hands-on as an owner-operator, where you can jump in and do the role of so many people to help them out when, they're overworked or whatever it might be, there's too much material or some equipment's broken down, whatever it is. When you can do that, I've seen it in my own yards. Just everybody's face lights up when they realize that the owner of the company is willing to actually do what they do, and they're not, too good or too important to actually jump on a forklift and go move some material around.
Yeah, no, and in fact, it's funny. There are times when I think it's an inverse relationship. You're only as good as your employees. You really are.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's about getting that known to them. When they realize that, then realize that that's how you care about them and that's how you think about them. It goes a really long way to get the most out of people and have have that team spirit where people want to do the best possible for everybody. I like to ask the question, what is the worst or best piece of equipment you've ever bought? And you don't have to mention the brand name, the company's name, and what exactly went down.
That's a great question. I try to forget the bad stuff, meaning the bad equipment that I got. I do. I try to forget it because there's no point in belaboring it. I think right now, and this is just in general, whether it's a wheel loader, an excavator, the shredder, the electronics in this equipment now is just crazy. I'll go and we have a problem with one of our large pieces of equipment, and literally the tech that you call out to send and they come in is sitting in his truck, not for 5 minutes, not for 15 minutes, but 50 minutes on his computer running diagnostics. They no longer get out and get into, to your equipment. Everything is, they're in their air conditioned truck. And these systems that they have developed, the whole DEF system, I mean, don't even get me started on that. It makes no sense. It doesn't clean any better than what we had before. And the failure rate on these systems is just ridiculous. So what I figured out now is by the time you've paid for your equipment, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, you have to buy a new piece.
Yeah.
So you're constantly staying in debt, or you're constantly having to, the average piece of equipment's $300,000 now. A decent forklift is $75,000, $85,000. I mean, this is not chump change. And then they come out, they do the diagnostics, and the part is in Milwaukee, and there's only one of them, and then they ship the parts the wrong part. So I don't know what they expect us to do. Have 4 or 5 spares sitting on, I don't know. And I don't know how these big yards do it. George has got hundreds of yards. I don't know if he's got, a spare wheel loader or material handler that he can just take to all these different places, because I'm sure he has the same problem. I mean, this is not a person problem.
Yeah. I mean, my company in South Africa, we had 85 yards. We had our own engineering division or business. We carried as many spares as possible for this exact reason. If you're down for a week or 2 weeks, the effect it has on your business is just absolutely drastic. So you can't actually afford to be down. So what is your advice then? Is it to buy equipment, the older versions with less technology that can go wrong and more simple, systems?
Now, the problem with that is now they won't stock the parts.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
then you have to custom make the parts. So, I mean, this is something that is directed by the manufacturers. I mean, it used to be you could buy a wheel loader and it would last 25,000 hours, 30,000 hours.
Easy. Yeah.
And now you're lucky if you get 10,000 to 12,000 hours without having a major, major problem.
Yep.
And I don't know the answer to it. I know it's a problem, and we are constantly dealing with it. I can't tell you that Caterpillar is better than Volvo or Volvo is better than Cinnabog. I can't tell you because it's throughout the whole industry. The one thing I will say is that in general, everything that is made now is still not made for the use and the type that the recycling industry demands. It's construction equipment. It's made to dig a hole. It's made to move dirt. But is it made to pick up 12, 15,000 pounds at a time of shred and dump it in a truck? I mean, you're smiling because you know what I mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. That's why equipment doesn't last. We're grinding it against metal every single day. And you need to do a lot of work on that equipment to make it last longer. And that costs a lot more money. But let's finish up here quickly because we're going to run out of time, but I need to ask you the last few questions. So before we go, quickly, who would you like to hear next on Born Scrappy?
I think hearing from people who have been in the industry and understand the challenges both today and where we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, I think is really important to the viewers, because that's really how you learn, is through experience. There isn't a
Exactly.
book you can buy.
I mean, exactly. And that's why we built this, right? Is there an example of somebody who you think we should have on?
I think you've had some really great people. I think Shelley Padnos, if you could ever get a hold of her, and especially talk about what's happening in legislation, and sort of her family story. She's a very interesting person.
Yeah, it's a great example.
There's a lot of, to be honest, people of my age and my gender, we're few and far between. And I do think that this industry, we're going to start seeing more women. We have to. We're half the population.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to promote as many as possible on the show as well. So, I always tell everybody that if there's somebody that if there's a female that who's doing wonderful things, please, I'd love to put them on. But there's still a lot more. In our next season, we start season 5 soon, and there's a whole list of females we're going to have on there, which we're really excited to start promoting. Even the younger coming through ones that are doing some incredible things, it's important for us all to be aware of them. Becky, I just want the viewers to get to know you a little bit better before we go. So I'm going to ask you the last little quick fire round. What's your favorite TV series or movie?
Movie still is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Classic. Awesome.
It's my favorite movie.
That's awesome.
I don't have a favorite TV show.
That's okay. Favorite place to visit?
I'm here. That's why I have a house here.
That's amazing.
Santa Fe, New Mexico.
New Mexico. Awesome. Favorite book?
There's a book that the biography of Amelia Earhart. Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. She must have a great story. Yeah, awesome. Last thing before we go, do you have a favorite quote?
Well, I think when I was president of the Gulf Coast region, it was very interesting. Being Jewish, I have had a lot of things taught to me from the Bible as well as from rabbis and things like that. So there's a quote that basically says that you're not obligated to complete the work, nor are you free to not do it. Which basically says we're all in charge of this environment.
That's awesome.
And that retirement or whatever you move on to, you're still part of the bigger picture. And you can't just divorce it. As long as you're standing up and not laying down 12 foot under, you're still responsible.
Yeah.
So that's probably my favorite quote. I probably said it wrong too.
I love it, Becky. This has been lots of fun. We could have actually gone on for a few more hours. So, Becky, thanks so much for making the time to be on Born Scrappy. Cheers.